Hi, my name is Mike Dillard, and this is Self-Made Man, the podcast for men who want to leave their mark on the world and create a legacy of honor, integrity, and achievement in every aspect of their lives. I'm glad you're here, and once again, it is time to forge your destiny. So I'm often asked which other podcasts I personally love and listen to, and one of my favorites is The Art of Charm, hosted by my good friend Jordan Harbinger. With over 3.5 million downloads every single month, The Art of Charm is one of the biggest shows in the world, and for good reason. If you haven't checked it out yet, take a listen to episode 632 with Chase Hughes. He's one of the world's foremost authorities on reading body language, and learning this skill set is kind of like acquiring telepathy, because you can read somebody's truth and whether or not they're being honest with you just through their body language alone. It's an absolutely fascinating episode, so go check out The Art of Charm and episode 632. Now, with that being said, my favorite podcast in the world is obviously a little show called Self-Made Man, and today we have a phenomenal episode for you with one of the most brilliant up-and-coming entrepreneurs in the world, Miss Amy Baglan. 3 years ago, Amy decided to start a niche dating site called MeetMindful. So think of it as Match.com, but for men and women who are into living a healthy, mindful lifestyle that might include pursuits like yoga and personal development. Well, despite the fact that she's not a tech person, she's never built a web business, ever. She's managed to grow MeetMindful into one of the fastest growing dating sites on the web, with hundreds of thousands of members joining in the past 36 months alone. So how did she do it? How can you take a proven business model and create a niche of your own? And what are the biggest lessons that you will need to know along the way? You're going to learn that and so much more here today. So please help me welcome Amy Baglan, and trust me on this one, get ready to take some notes. Welcome back, Mike Dillard here, and today we're going to talk to a new friend of mine, Amy Baglan, who was introduced to me by a gentleman y'all know very well here on the show, Mr. Eben Pagan. And Amy is the founder of the dating site that's growing like crazy right now, MeetMindful.com. And it's so funny, Amy, I think I told you this the first time that we talked. I was actually a member of MeetMindful like a year or two ago, checking out the site with my cool little dating profile and all of that fun stuff. And here we are having a podcast together. So this is really great. Thanks for joining us.
I guess it was meant to be. Thank you, Mike, for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm really, really curious about how you ended up going down this path and building this, crazy platform that MeetMindful has become, because I don't think that that's your background. And yet you've happened to have pulled off something pretty amazing.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, I don't think many people would say that building a dating site is their background when they start out, right? So it's interesting. Remember the Steve Jobs address, I think it was Stanford, from many years ago, where he talked about connecting the dots backwards?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's exactly how my story goes. So it all makes sense when I look back on it. So I'd been in startups before they were like cool, right? They were just like new baby companies, and all throughout college, and ended up launching a restaurant magazine in Miami, and then moved to New York and worked at a tech startup where I was the first employee alongside my CEO, and we grew a text message marketing platform. It's kind of basically like MailChimp, but for SMS, back in the mid 2000s when SMS was really taking off for businesses, and grew that alongside my CEO for 5 years, and just really got what it took to take something from nothing to, I can't remember where we were in revenue when I left, but to a legitimate company with tens of thousands of customers. And I loved it. I loved every bit of it. But there was something that was holding me back from being like, this is where, this is my purpose, which is because I wasn't feeling like text messaging and B2B sales was really like lighting up my soul, right? I don't think many people would say it does. But for those who do, God bless them. And I ended up in my mid-20s in New York discovering my version of mindful living and how I got into mindfulness and this whole path that I'm on in the first place. And that was originally through yoga. And then I developed a really deep meditation practice when I was up there. And then ended up going to a holistic nutrition program called Institute for Integrative Nutrition, which has a ton of amazing graduates doing really cool things in the world now, and was lucky enough to be part of this like-minded tribe of people who, I think our class was like 1,200 people meeting every weekend for 6 months in New York. And for the first time, I was like surrounded by so many people who cared about making big change in the world, and they were all inspired to like take life by the reins and just go for it. I love that. I hadn't been around that, and I was hungry for more of that. And then I think during that time, I read 4 Hour Workweek, and like many people, decided to completely change my life. I ended up leaving the company that I had grown for 5 years and gave up my equity, sold all my things, bought a one-way ticket to India, and I just traveled for a year. I did the Eat, Pray, Love thing.
Wow.
I studied with, incredible teachers over in India and in Thailand and in Bali. I taught retreats. I did the requisite yoga teacher training in India, of course, and just immersed myself in this stuff and really found my way in my own path and what was most important to me. And what I discovered through my travels that year was, I love learning and I love diving into a new way to expand my mind, body, and spirit. And at the time, that looked like yoga. It looked like energy work. It looked like Thai yoga massage. I got really into Thai yoga massage and was doing that when I came back to the States. And the interesting thing was every time I went to a new city in my travels, I kind of organically tapped into this like-minded tribe of expats who, all had similar passions and values and mindsets about how they lived their life and, what they were up to in the world. And it was so inspiring. And it was, again, like after leaving that nutrition school in New York, the first time I really got to tap into these communities and the power of like-minded communities. So when I moved to Denver, this was about almost 6 years ago, I didn't know anybody. I knew like one person. And actually, do you know Greg Hickman?
The name sounds familiar.
He's very much in your space. I bet you guys have met before. And he was the one person that I knew when I moved here. We're still good friends to this day. And I wanted to meet new people. I was on dating apps and dating sites at the time, and I was really having a hard time. And it was so clear to me that it was super difficult to find people who had like-minded values and mindsets and how they looked at how they live their life. And it's really difficult to get at that looking at a dating profile. It's just not like checking the boxes for religion or, kids or height or whatever, it's deeper than that. And I was having a really tough time discerning that. So I kept going on all these shitty dates, and that was what's going on in my personal life. And then professionally, I decided that I wanted to start an events company called Yoga Dates, because I noticed that I would go to the yoga studios and everyone would sit there on their mats in silence for like 5 or 10 minutes before the teacher came in. And I thought it was really awkward because here's a bunch of people just sitting in silence and there's nothing going on. But B, they all have something in common. And I didn't understand why here you are in a room full of people who clearly value one thing, yoga, right? And I can make the assumption that most of them are probably into some sort of, healthy lifestyle and potentially spirituality or personal growth work. And yet no one's talking. And so Yoga Dates, the events company I started, was my answer to solving that. So we did yoga events for singles, and it was just me. I was hustling in my yoga clothes in my apartment in Denver and teaming up with all the most popular yoga teachers in town and the best studios and creating really fun events. We would do partner yoga speed dating. We would do vinyasa and vino. We would have community nights where we'd watch movies screened from Gaia MTV, or now Gaia, excuse me. And we just had a blast, and people would connect in the most beautiful, authentic ways. And it was fun, and it wasn't weird and awkward singles events vibe. That's that's the thing that we didn't want to be.
Right.
And while I learned a lot doing that, one thing I learned is what many people listening would probably imagine is that running events for money when the ticket's cheap and you cap out at 40 people is a terrible business model. It was just stupid. Like I couldn't make, I was like teaching yoga and doing Thai massage on the side to make all of this work, at the most basic level. But aside from the business model sucking, I had people come up to me all the time and they would just say, this is the only place I've been able to find so many like-minded people in one room. Thank you. I've met so many people, some that I want to date, some like, this is my new best friend, like him and I are going to do business together. And so there were connections happening all over the place. And that was awesome. People would ask me to do the events like every week, which I definitely was not going to commit to, but clearly the desire was there for them. They would ask me, how can we connect with people like outside of your events? Are you going to do this online? Like, what's the deal? And then the last piece of data that I found so fascinating, and I had no clue that this was going to happen, but it makes so much sense in hindsight, is that people who didn't do yoga would call me and be like, hey, I've never been on a mat before, but I'm a Buddhist and I think these are my people. Can I come? Or, I have a really dedicated martial arts practice and I don't do yoga, but I really think that this is going to be a good fit for me. Can I come? And I kept getting that over and over and over. And it was so clear to me that it wasn't about the yoga. It was about, the value set and the mindset of the people who were coming through. And that was what prompted me from, all those different data points, right? My own experience, the feedback, the fact that the business model was terrible, and my experience in tech and wanting to get back into tech. And so I looked at the market size of this kind of, we call it the mindful living market. So the people into health and wellness and yoga and meditation and personal growth and all the different variations of that. And it's huge. It's huge and it's growing really quickly. What was once fringe, all this stuff was once like a thing that people would kind of not talk about in public. Now it's becoming like the hot new thing. And no one in the dating or social networking space, for that matter, was addressing this market in a big way. And so that's what prompted me to go after it.
That's awesome. Yeah, well, and you're describing basically all of Austin, by the way. So as far as the mindful, the part of the culture here. But so that's a big leap. You identified a group of people with a common passion. You identified a problem that you had and that they had as well. And how do you make that leap? How do you bridge the gap from having that idea to saying, you know what, I'm going to build a dating platform? From a tech perspective, that's a big jump, especially if you haven't done it before.
Yeah, totally. So really great question. And I think this is the reason that's such a good question is because this is the place where people get stuck. Yeah. And it seems like this mountain that just is, how the fuck am I going to climb that? Right. And I had a business coach at the time who was helping me get really clear on what I actually wanted to go do, because I see this all too often. Like somebody has this kind of nebulous idea that takes an hour to explain, and they start going to try to do that and find a co-founder to do that and raise money for that. And yet still nobody knows exactly what's going on. So I worked a lot with my coach at the time to get clear on what I really wanted to do first. And once I narrowed that down, I decided that I wanted to take a content approach and drive traffic through content created, mostly articles at the time, written by people who were thought leaders in the space, because I truly believe that if people are going to spend as much time and attention on personal growth and development in other areas of their life, that if you apply that to dating and relationships, that you can have, results and satisfaction that are just exponential compared to what we're used to. And so we started a WordPress site and then I got an editor who was doing like probably 20 hours a week at a low hourly rate or, basic hourly rate. And she started getting some article ideas together and getting some writers to agree to write for free for the exposure. And I met a co-founder it was like kismet the way that we met. We met in a yoga class.
No way.
The day that I fired this stupid firm that I met on Elance that was like charging me way too much money.
So the Elance firm you had hired to build the platform.
Yeah, I hired them to build the WordPress site, because it was all going to be custom designs. It wasn't going to be a theme. Yeah. So it was going to be custom themes. So I They actually were based out of Austin, which is funny. Probably another guy. Anyway, it was too expensive. We didn't need a firm. We needed a guy or a girl, to do this. And so I fired the firm. I said, screw it. I'm going to go to yoga. I just need to clear my head. I just need to hire like a front-end designer developer who I can like sit down with and talk to, I went to yoga at noon and I'm like in downward dog and there's this guy behind me who's like nailing his handstands. And I'm thinking, that's cool. And after class, he came up to me and he was like, hey, I recognize you. Aren't you from Galvanize? Aren't you working on that dating app thing? And I was like, yeah. He goes, yeah, I co-founded an app there as well. And I just left that company and I'm doing freelance front-end design and development work. And I was like, oh, really? So that's how I met my co-founder, and I brought him on board part-time initially. And the goal was just get an MVP out there. So I think a lot of people think too hard about like, how do I get from A to Z?
Real quick, Amy, MVP, minimum viable product?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you for clarifying that.
No problem.
So instead of how do I get from A to Z, it's how can I get from A to B? Like the next step for us was to prove that we could get people to sign up for a dating site that said it was for people who are into the stuff that they're into. And then, that they would talk to each other, meet each other. And then soon after that they would pay, because I want to build a business that makes money. I don't want to build a business that has to be, that's going to grow as quickly as possible, but doesn't make any money and has to figure out how to do it later. So we found a BuddyPress theme, which is a plugin for WordPress. And it was a dating site theme that we skinned to make it look custom. And so we didn't have to build any back-end features or technology. We just had this out-of-the-box thing. And granted, it sucked. Like, it was terrible, but it was art.
Yeah, got the job done.
Yeah. So we launched this WordPress thing because I had my yoga dates business and I had this list and I had this public persona and I had all these followers in Denver and Boulder. That was who I launched it to. And we had a bunch of partners involved in our launch party. This was the summer of 2014, so 3 years ago. And all of those partners, brought their community to the event. And we had like 300 or 400 people at this kickoff launch party. It was amazing. And we launched a product that to this day, we laugh about how much it sucked. I mean, it was ugly. Like, it was just, it's funny to think about it because it still worked. And which was really what we wanted to know. Like, if people have a need that's big enough, they will use your shitty product because they need to be able to solve that need, right? Or solve that problem. And so that's what we did. We launched the WordPress site. 3 months later, we started charging people. I think we had like 1,500 people signed up on the network at that time, and most of them were in Denver and Boulder. So we thought, well, let's see what happens. And so people started paying us, and they started paying us at high rates, which, I know that it was the lowest hanging fruit and like our most passionate people who were joining at that time. But it was amazing to see how those upgrade rates have stayed pretty much consistent over time.
I want to ask you, if you don't mind, I want to ask you a question about that, because that's a huge question that every entrepreneur has to answer when they launch a product like this, especially with a recurring revenue business model, which is how much should I charge? And so did y'all just pull a number out and you're like, we're going to see what happens here? Or did you split test a few different numbers?
We A/B test everything. And even back then, we were smart enough to A/B test our pricing. We did a few different things. I think we landed at like $9 a month for a while until we launched a new version of our platform. But we were also selling like 1 year and lifetime memberships, which looking back on it, a lifetime membership doesn't sound so great to buy for a dating site, but we sold it anyway. And a lot of people bought it. And so we did play with different price points even back then. I don't think we were sophisticated enough to start looking at churn numbers, but for people who do want to learn more about price testing and starting to toggle with their pricing packages, that's something that we pay a lot of attention to now. Is not just the initial upgrade rates, but how long does somebody continue to pay that recurring subscription? Because depending on churn rates, different prices might look more attractive in the beginning, but then not so great later, or vice versa.
Right. Absolutely. And, I know in my last business, we charged $97 a month or $600 for the year for our product. And I think the average monthly retention was like 3.5 months. And so we would try as hard as we could to get people to upgrade to the annual option because it would essentially double our customer value.
Yeah. That's
so
great.
yeah, absolutely have to look at that. So you launched it. You've got some revenue coming in now. Are you living hand to mouth at this point? Are you looking to raise money? What's going through your head at this moment in time?
So what was going through my head right before we started charging people was I should quit now before I take anybody's money. That's what was going through my head at first. I'll be really honest, because I just was terrified in the beginning. And I was still doing my part-time massage work to pay a lot of the bills. And I had borrowed $75,000 from my parents to just like pay the people who absolutely had to be paid, which was my co-founder, who at the time was doing, just the part-time design and development work. And he needed to be paid along with our editor. So that lasted for a bit. I wasn't taking any money at that time. I didn't start paying myself for a while, actually. And from there, we had the numbers around, how many people would upgrade. So basically we could start our sales funnel, right? We could start looking at our sales funnel and say, when we generate this much traffic, this is how much we can make at the end of it, right? And I had this Excel file that I would look at constantly, which was my projections for the year. And I would use that to talk to investors. And I decided that I was going to I set out to raise like 500 grand or something. And the whole point of that was to just get enough money to engage with the development shop so they could build like I call it our second MVP, because it was basically going back to basics on a custom application instead of WordPress.
Right.
So I wanted to engage with the firm, and then we wanted to hire our first backend developer coming out of that engagement. So that's where the bulk of that money was going towards. And then we had some money allocated for marketing campaigns, which we had no idea what we were going to do. And, I am not a technical founder, nor am I'm not the person who's going to be digging into AdWords or Facebook ad manager. Like my brain doesn't do that stuff very well.
I resemble that remark.
Yeah. You and I are probably very similar in many ways. And so I needed a person who could make sense of all these numbers that we were tracking. We were tracking things. We still to this day do, obviously. We tracked things religiously. Like everything that could be tracked in our software, we were doing it. And so we needed to hire someone who knew how to make sense of that stuff. So we brought on an analyst. And during that time, I started talking to people and talking to investors and trying to raise this money. It took a while. It took probably 6 or 7 months to raise that cash. And Eben, who you mentioned at the beginning of the show, is our first major investor who came on board. And I met Eben at a conference in Boulder like 3 years ago and got to know each other over a few months, or over probably 3 to 6 months. And then he came on as an investor and advisor. And that was a pivotal moment for us because his involvement allowed a lot of other investors to say yes. And he introduced me to some great people as well who are now involved. And we ended up oversubscribing that round, hiring the developer we needed to hire and the marketing analysts that we needed to hire. And then we were suddenly a team of 4. We launched that kind of second, or let's call it a beta version of the site, which was all of our own custom code, the following summer of 2015. We changed our pricing at that point too, and raised it and added different pricing packages. So instead of just 1 month, you could do 3, 6, or 12-month packages. Then we started, a few months later, we found our first major traction channel, which was Elephant Journal, which is still a partner of ours to this day. Their content site, kind of like the Huffington Post for the mindfulness crowd, if you will. And working with Elephant was huge for us. Like our growth path just skyrocketed because we were suddenly getting thousands of people a month instead of just 500 people a month.
Can you share some, and you don't have to get specific if you don't want to here, but just maybe some benchmark numbers for those who are listening when it comes to conversions, right? Like it costs us this much money, to get a free person to sign up for a free profile. And then out of every 10 who set up a free profile, how many people join, and take a paid membership? Because I just have zero insight into the actual metrics from a business model like this?
Yeah. I mean, our metrics vary depending on what cohort we're talking about and what marketing channel we're talking about. So I won't get into specifics, but ultimately the funnel looks like, so we have people who land on our landing page, and then we have, anywhere from like 20 to 50% of those people who land will convert to a sign up. Okay. So to creating a profile.
Mm-hmm.
And then of those people, a certain percentage end up paying us over time. And that varies wildly based on, like I said, like their age, their gender, where they came from, how many people are in their area. And then they stay on for a certain number of months as a paying customer. I don't really share that data publicly, but that's essentially
and I wouldn't expect you to. Yeah, of course. No, I appreciate that.
So that's why content marketing works really well for us, because whenever we are teamed up with content partners that have very high value traffic for us, the funnel is so predictable from partners like that it's really easy for us to say yes to those types of partnerships. Mm-hmm. So Elephant Journal was the first of many partners that we work with in that way. And shortly after our growth started, I mean, we were on this like insane, like 300%, 400% month over month growth for a little while because our numbers were so small. And it was the time where TechStars Boulder, which is it's a global accelerator program. They're based out of Boulder. They started here. They were taking applications for their 2016 class, and we applied, and we were one of 10 companies to get accepted. Awesome. So that was kind of the turning point, another turning point for us. We proved that we knew how to build something, obviously. We proved that we knew how to get traction and how to use that data to get more traction. And then we got into this accelerator program, which really solidified our place in the Denver Boulder tech community, and really got to know all the people that we need to know. And we learned so much in our time in TechStars. That was in the spring of 2016. And we went from being a group of four or five people who wanted to learn how to run a startup really well and had the desire and putting in the effort to do it. We went from a team like that to a team that actually knew how to do it, because we had the just amazing mentorship and advisors through the TechStars program, and worked with people who are some of the best in the world at growing lean and using agile methodologies to grow your startup. So we still use that stuff religiously to this day.
What would you say was the most memorable lesson that you took away from that time?
We have a retro format that we follow on a weekly, monthly, quarterly cadence. And actually, I could wrap this up on a meta level too. Creating an appropriate cadence of planning and looking back and learning and using those learnings for future work. So as the company grows, that cadence and how we do that shifts, because it's different when you're a team of 5 people and then when you're a team of 15 people, for example. So we're learning how to adjust as we grow. But one example of what we do, like I said, weekly, monthly, quarterly, is a retro, which stands retrospective, I guess it is, where we go through in a systematic way what happened over that time period that we're reflecting on. So in our weekly retros as a team, we go around and we share, so it goes, I liked, I wished, slash I learned, and then what if. We also have time for shout outs and ditch of the week, which is who screwed up the most that week, and then we celebrate it. And that we took this directly from TechStars. And so every week we have an open forum for everyone to share what worked and what they loved from that week, what they didn't like, and subsequently what they learned from that experience. And then what ifs are really generative. It's like, what can we do? What if we did this thing? What if we did a video with JP Sears? That was one of my what ifs a couple of weeks ago. And then we've implemented what if days, where every fourth Friday of the month, we spend the whole day dedicated to what if activities. And so it's kind of like our little miniature version of Google's 20% time. And so that's one example. And then we take that retro format and we apply it in our monthly retros in a bigger way. And we present all the what do we call them? Events that happened that month. And so we put we use so many sticky notes here. So we put a whole wall up of stickies of factual events that happened that month. And then we say, what are our emotions associated with these events? And we go through and put stickies with our emotions about these events. And then we do learnings associated with these things. So I don't need to get into that, but what did we learn about this? And then implications moving forward. So it's a great way to lay out what happened, what it means, and what we need to pay attention or what we need to do moving forward because of that. And then we pick our top 2 or 3 implications and make sure that we move forward in the next month or the next quarter with those in mind. So it's a really agile way to learn from what happened without taking the entire team or roadmap off course. I'm happy to share a link to that process, by the way, if it's something you want to share with your listeners.
Yeah, that'd be, I was actually just thinking about that. I was like, I wish I was in TechStars. I'd love to learn this. So.
Yeah, this comes from one of my favorite and most amazing mentors, Zack. And Zack was one of the first executives at Rally Software. And Rally's whole thing was to teach other businesses how to, and also to run agile or lean practices. And so they took what development teams have been using in their dev cadence and they apply it to businesses. What Zack does, he applies those practices across different departments and on a corporate level so businesses can benefit from this stuff too. So he has a whole website. I believe it's www.growinglean.com, where he has a lot of these different models for anybody to learn from. So
cool. To
answer your question in a nutshell, those methodologies and baking them into our ops was, I think, the best thing we got out of the program, along with the lifelong relationships, of course.
So, I can't help but notice how big of a difference there's been in your personal growth from, when you started holding these little yoga events for 40 people and the founder that you've become over the last 3 to 4 years. What's your biggest learning experience been throughout this process?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. It's something that I reflect on a lot. I think when I ever write a book, it's going to be something around this topic. For all of the personal growth stuff I do through, whether it's workshops or studying with teachers around the world and my own meditations and reflections and whatnot, I don't think that it even compares to what's happened just as I've had to hit all my growth edges at different stages as a CEO and growing this business. And I think the single most impactful thing for me that I've learned through just the day-to-day of running the business is, and this is going to go a little bit deep, so it's like a vulnerable thing for me to admit, but it's precisely why I do it. Because I've learned about myself. I'm an Enneagram 3. So I love people and I am a total achiever and I always want to win. And it requires me to get people's buy-in and to sell to people and to get them excited in order to do that. And so that's the great side of it. But the shadow side of that, the side that I've really learned to work with over the past year in particular, has been I really care a lot about what people think. And I will actually think about me and my behavior. I will actually, if I'm not careful and I don't recognize it, I will behave in a way to get an outcome from other people or to make them like me or to have them affirm and validate me more than to actually get the thing done that I really need to get done or the thing I really want. And, it's great when those things line up, but when they don't, I have seen myself in the past act in ways that aren't really conducive to getting really great results. And so what I've learned over the past year in particular is just to be able to recognize when I'm doing something or acting in such a way that is for outside validation and not just really following my own core desires and what I know needs to happen and my own intuition. And so that has been huge. And I honestly don't think that we could grow any faster or grow better or smarter if I didn't really remember that on a day-to-day basis, because it allows for me to kind of step out of people pleasing and leading, actually step into leadership, authentic leadership.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at any really successful CEO, whether that's Steve Jobs or, whoever it may be, they can't bring their vision to life unless they're willing to hurt some people's feelings. And it's not intentional. It's just, hey, here's the vision that we need to accomplish, and it's going to be very difficult, and not everybody's going to make it, and everyone has to be okay with that, especially the founder, which is tough. I totally hear you. One of the hardest things for me, I don't like confrontation, has been learning how to fire somebody, especially if I like them. But I mean, gosh, I've had to go through that lesson over and over and over again, unfortunately. But I think I've finally gotten to a point where I can do that now,
What is your, if you could say one thing that helps you the most in that, what is it?
Having a mission that I value more than people's feelings. So that's how I've gotten over it now, where it's like, hey, the mission that we have here is more important in the grand scheme of things than the temporary pain that's going to be caused by having to let somebody go here and to deal with that confrontation. Yeah. And that's what's given me the ability to go ahead and go through with those. So
can I offer my thing on that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So my old boss used to make me fire people when I was like 25 years old. It was horrible. And that didn't really teach me much, except that I dreaded those conversations.
Yeah.
But what I've learned here is the importance of taking 100% responsibility for everything. If I have a problem with somebody, it is also my problem that it happened. And it's my responsibility that I clean it up and that I set everyone else up for success. And so if I fail, if I want to fire someone, I basically look at it as my failure, because at some point it is my failure that they are not thriving. And that's all the way to setting the job description properly for the people we're interviewing, to the interviews that I hold, to the questions I ask, to the way we onboard them, to the way we set their first 30, 60, 90-day goals, and how they're managed throughout the entire process. And if they aren't thriving, I could have done something differently. So that helps a lot.
And you're absolutely right. And Sheryl Sandberg, the CEO of Facebook, has the exact same philosophy, where she's like, no matter what happens, she takes ownership of, and she owns that, and then figures out a solution. But it's never somebody else's issue or fault.
This reminds me of, when we talked on Friday morning, I was on my way to this conscious leadership camp. It was a 3-day training to teach and really embody the conscious leadership commitments. There's 15 commitments. And I am amazed at what shifts have happened for me just in this past weekend. And that work is very much aligned with what we were just talking about, taking 100% responsibility. And if I have an issue, it's not even about, it doesn't have to be about firing someone, but if I have an issue, I have to sit and really recognize that a lot of the anger and the fear that I might be feeling is actually directed towards myself, not the other person.
Yeah. It's it's a hell of a mirror for sure. Yeah. Being an entrepreneur. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So this is a big change of gears real quick, but I know we're coming up on our time limit here, and I want to make sure that I get this in. Your business model and the one that I'm currently working on, the way I communicate it to my team is that it's either success or death by 1,000 cuts. Meaning, when you have a platform with a fairly sophisticated customer journey, as far as how they interact with the site, what the upgrade process looks like, you're going to succeed, you're going to fail by the number of split tests and experiments you're constantly able to run. And 1,000 experiments over the course of 2 or 3 years is going to determine whether you're super successful or not, right? And you mentioned that earlier in the interview, that y'all are constantly doing that. And my question for you is, how do you actually manage that? Are you just using Google Analytics? Is there some software platform like Optimizely that y'all use? But what does that look like from an execution standpoint?
Yeah. So that is a big question. And the funny thing is, I'm probably the worst person in the company to ask this question, but I'm going to give it the best shot.
Cool.
So, we run experiments across pretty much every department. And so they show up differently, and the way we track them differ because of that. We have, let me just go high level first. Using the agile methods that I talked about before, one of the other things that we do is we have a enterprise company Kanban board, and we have basically things coming up to be done, things that we're doing right now once they've been released. And then once they've been released, they sit there. Let's say that we just released a new landing page. It will sit there in released until we validate it. So we have a different column for validated. And all of our tests and everything that we've done, actually everything we do in the company sits in release until we actually take it to validated, whether it's with data because of our tracking tools or some other form of validation, like a new hire hit their 30-day goals 100%. So we have a culture that's super nerdy about making sure that we have answers to everything that we've done. That's the first thing. We use Optimizely for landing page tests. And, when we do these initiatives, landing page testing, like we might test 80 to 100 different versions within a 30-day period. So we don't do that constantly, but we go through every 5 or 6 months or so, we do a new refresh. And we're about to do a brand refresh, so we'll be doing landing page tests from there. And we'll probably do, 100 or more. So that's Optimizely. And my marketing manager tracks that through a Google sheet, and she has her own system for because it's all attached to different Facebook campaigns, and our Facebook campaigns are broken out by gender and age group. So there's 6 different groups of demographic targeting that we're targeting on Facebook at any given time, and they all have different landing pages that we're testing. So she has this whole document that tracks what won in Optimizely for which group, so she knows that this is the image that works best for women who are between 35 and 44, and so on and so forth. So she has an internal tracking system for that, and it's tied to Optimizely and Facebook.
Cool.
Within the product, we use Mixpanel. Do you know Mixpanel?
No, huh?
It's kind of like Kissmetrics is one of their competitors, but Mixpanel has been a godsend for us. I don't know where we'd be without it, honestly. Mixpanel tracks, so our developers will, anything that they build, from a button to any big feature, every part of it is tracked with a Mixpanel event. And through Mixpanel, we can track the entire customer journey and what they've done, and then we can run custom filters and searches to say, okay, of the people who came in Colorado, where we were running this split test on this feature, how many people clicked this button over this button, and what's then we can get the A/B test results from there. So Mixpanel is the tool that sits on top of everything within the app that we use to identify how the tests are doing.
Cool.
And then we also have my co-founder is the chief product officer. So he's the one who runs all the tests and who's getting what tests and when are we killing them? When are we applying them across the entire network? i.e. if something wins, right? And he has a super sophisticated document of tracking all the big things that are in the works right now. And then we built a testing structure within our dev environment that can run all sorts of different tests all at once, and they don't overlap different groups who are in certain tests. That's probably confusing to hear, but we've gotten real nerdy about it way from the beginning. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, you have to be. Again, this is a numbers based game, and especially with such a low dollar product price point that you guys have, you don't have a lot of room for error, right? The margins are pretty small when it comes to customer acquisition. Yeah. So that's awesome. Thank you for that resource. That's exactly what I've been looking for, and I did not know about that. So thank you very much.
Yeah, what I say is track as much stuff as you can up front, and then take out events you learn you don't need later, because it's much more expensive from a time and resources perspective to have to realize you're not tracking the proper events in order to make certain decisions based on data. It's so much more expensive to realize after the fact than it is to just strip out that event tracking that you don't need down the line. So once you get it set up, cool. Track as much as you can.
Awesome. Absolutely. Well, Amy, I don't want to go over our time limit here today. This has been an absolutely phenomenal discussion. My brain's fried right now. So
I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
It's interesting. It's awesome in the way that I've learned so much, and yet it's intimidating because I'm like, oh shit, I've got a really long way to go. So,
yeah, I know the feeling. It's it doesn't happen overnight. I still feel like I don't know I mean, my realm of the things I know I don't know is so much bigger now. And so I feel like I don't know anything. But I mean, I know more than I did yesterday or than I did a year ago. So
absolutely.
I think you interviewed Dan Sullivan, right?
I did, yeah.
Are you familiar with his concept of avoiding the gap?
I'm going to say no.
So basically, his whole theory is that entrepreneurs, the most important thing they need to protect is their confidence. I think we can all agree on that. And that one of the ways that we are so good at killing our confidence is always comparing where we are now to some point in the future, like, above the horizon, right? Beyond the horizon. And the horizon always moves and we always move. So we're never satisfied because that gap is where we feel like we haven't achieved. And what he says is always measure backwards. So in order to avoid what he calls that confidence gap, always look at where you are now in respect to where you know you've been. And, 99.99% of the time, you've made progress and you've learned something new and you've done something to be proud of. And I think that that's a really healthy way to be looking at things because there's always more to do.
And for those who are listening, I would also add to that, you'll be absolutely shocked at how fast you develop. I launched my very first business ever, sold my very first product online ever just 10 years ago. And it absolutely blows me away as far as how far I've come and what I've been able to accomplish in just 10 years. So don't underestimate that. It'll happen much faster than you think it will if you're dedicated to the process. So
absolutely. I would put a caveat and say, don't expect to have a 4-hour work week anytime soon, because that did trip me up for a while.
Yeah, you can have that. You can build a lifestyle business if you want to, but that's a decision you're going to have to make, right? What are you looking to accomplish? Yeah, absolutely. Well, Amy, thank you so much. Obviously, for all of you who are single out there, go over to MeetMindful.com and check it out. Set up a profile. It's been really cool to be able to participate in that as a customer before we had a chance to meet. So thank you very much. And this has been awesome. Thank you, Amy.
Mike, thank you so much. And it's awesome spending time with you.
Awesome. Well, guys, thanks so much for listening. Once again, go check out Meet Mindful, and we'll see you next week. Take care.
We'll be right back.